All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Phoenix Realtors Water Panel. We are very excited to have a couple of excellent water experts with us today. Just some housekeeping before we get started. We do have a Q&A function, and I would like to encourage you to ask your questions. And if we have time at the end, we will get to them. But I would like to introduce our four amazing panelists very quickly before we jump in. First, we have Chris Mackey, who is the Community and Economic Development Director at the City of Phoenix. We have Patrick Dent, who's the Assistant General Manager of Water Policy at the Central Arizona Project. We have Chris Phelan, who is the Policy Advisor for U.S. Senator Kyrsten Sinema. And we have Doug Dunham, the Manager of Water Resources at EPCOR. So to kick off this webinar, I'd like to throw out a question to all of our panelists. And I'd like you to explain your role in Arizona's water ecosystem. So what role do you have in either water policy or planning? I would love if you could explain that to our members. Let's go ahead and start with Patrick.
Thank you. Again, my name is Patrick Dent. I'm the Assistant General Manager of Water Policy at the Central Arizona Project. The Central Arizona Project brings Colorado River into central and southern Arizona and has water delivery contracts with a number of Arizona tribal communities, irrigation districts, municipalities, both private and public, and some industrial water users as well. So we are the state's largest single provider of renewable water within Arizona, and the largest user of Colorado River water, with the other water users within Arizona being located on the river itself, on Arizona's western border. Our primary role is as the operator and maintainer of the Central Arizona Project. We're responsible for delivering water essentially as a wholesaler to municipalities and some of those contractors I listed before. We're also responsible for repaying the federal government the cost of the construction of the project. But we do engage in policy issues within Arizona in a couple of ways. I would say chiefly as a Section 5 contractor for the Colorado River, we engage on Colorado River issues, and we partner closely with the Arizona Department of Water Resources on negotiations, and we have big work ahead of us in terms of addressing the drought and declining water supplies on the Colorado River. So that's a significant role of CAP. CAP is governed by a publicly elected board and is also responsible for the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, which is a district that helps support the state's Assured Water Supply Program by replenishing groundwater within central and southern Arizona associated with direct use of people's homes. So Colorado River and the groundwater district are largely the most direct roles that CAP plays.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go to Doug.
Get my mute turned off here. Good afternoon. My name is Doug Dunham. I'm with EPCOR Water. We are a water, wastewater, and wholesale water utility provider providing services across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. We're the largest private utility in the Southwest, largest private utility in Arizona. And we have systems all across Arizona. We are a CAP subcontractor, so thanks, Patrick, for your deliveries. We also are a contractor directly with Bureau of Reclamation for our communities that we serve on the Colorado River. We've got a pretty diverse portfolio. We hold just about every type of water you could have in Arizona. So we have surface water, CAP, we obviously use groundwater, we recycle all of our reclaimed water, we have that as well, and we have tribal leases also in our portfolio. Basically, we would be the second largest city in the state if you kind of compressed all of our customers together. And we look forward to continuing our service across the state. We are, as I said, we are the direct retailer providing water service to homes and businesses across the valley.
Fantastic. Let's go to Chris Phelan.
Yeah, hi everyone. I am the Senator's policy advisor for water policy here in DC. I'm a native Phoenician. We work with everyone on the call here. So I would say primarily what everyone is probably most familiar with would be the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act drought funding. So that is for specific infrastructure improvements to infrastructure along the Colorado River and other Bureau of Reclamation facilities that serve the Phoenix and greater Phoenix metro area. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, the $4 billion for immediate sort of drought relief and conservation. Those are, I think, the two most important things that we've worked with. But we work with CAP, EPCOR, SAP, the cities of municipal Phoenix and the city of Phoenix itself and others in supporting the state in its negotiations with the broader Colorado River basin. So the other 6 states that rely on the Colorado River and Mexico, Congress is responsible for ultimately passing and certifying the agreements like the drought contingency plan and the post 2026 guidelines, which I think Patrick and me will maybe get into a bit in the future. But we're responsible for funding the infrastructure conservation facilities that are going to protect Arizona's federal water supply. And obviously that's the Colorado River and the Salt and Verde rivers coming into Phoenix. And, you know, we also play a small role in working on groundwater issues in the state, although those are really governed by the state of Arizona, so the legislature and the governor, things like the Saudi alfalfa fields. I know that's probably of interest to folks. That's outside technically of federal purview. That is state water, but ultimately it all sort of runs together, to use a bad pun. And yeah, that's my role, kind of across everyone and everything in the state, trying to ensure that we have enough water for folks like you to do the work that you're doing in Phoenix. So thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And then finally, let's go with Chris Mackey.
Thanks so much. So as the economic development director, I'm kind of the odd man out here where it comes to water policy, but 30 years of experience here in this market, recruiting companies into Arizona and helping our existing companies grow and thrive. And that doesn't happen if you can't give them an assured water supply. That is, for 30 years, that's been one of the first questions that companies that are coming into Arizona are going to ask us is, where's my water going to come from? And how do I know that it's going to be here 50, 60, 100 years from now? So of course, I work closely with our Phoenix Water Department. They're at the seat at every large recruitment that we do. Phoenix is really in the catbird seat where we're a customer of Patrick's as well. We love our North Phoenix area is primarily served by the CAP, which is, as he said, is heavily reliant on the Colorado River. But we've got about 2/3 of the city that's serviced by Salt River Project. So that is the Verde and the Salt that service those areas. And then, of course, we have surface water, and about 3% of our water comes from groundwater. So Phoenix is in this incredible position of having such a robust water supply. We've had an advanced water management plan since 1942 to be able to assure our citizens once they build something. I got to put my money where my mouth is and make sure that they're going to be able to keep going and keep running faucets and flushing toilets and running their manufacturing equipment. So we are beholden to all of these great partners that we have here on the meeting today.
Awesome. I think that's a great segue into our first question. One common question that I hear, whether from current residents or folks that are thinking about moving to Arizona, is, do we have enough water? What's our plan? So I'd like to pose this first question to Patrick and Doug. And Chris, if you have anything to add, please feel free. But I'd like to know, what is the long-term plan for Arizona's water sources? What does that look like? Take us behind the scenes of a 100-year supply plan.
Would you like me to go first, Doug? Okay, I'm happy to. So, Arizona's water supply does rely on a mix of surface and groundwater, as Chris just indicated. And so here in the valley, and where Phoenix is served specifically surface water supplies from the Salt River project that rely on snow melt and runoff on the Salt and Verde rivers are a key component of the water supply and have been for Phoenix for over 100 years now. Certainly to facilitate Arizona's growth, what I'll call off the service areas of the Salt River project. Those were either supported by groundwater, which was a non-renewable supply. And so somewhat commensurate with the construction of the Central Arizona project, which was to bring Colorado River water into Central Arizona. Which was something that the state had advocated 100 years ago as well, is that they needed a project. They needed a way to bring a renewable water supply. Arizona started looking at importing Colorado River water back in the 30s and 40s, and went through a very lengthy and certainly difficult battle to both secure a water supply to the Colorado River for Central Arizona and to get funding for a project that is the Central Arizona project. CAP has been delivering water to the valley since the 80s. I mentioned what the list of contractors were, but they serve a broad need of interest within Arizona. There are a number of Arizona tribes that have a role in water, and that can be a bit of a complex issue. What the tribal role is they both have an interest in terms of having water for their tribal homelands, maybe their own agricultural practices, but they also have the ability to be partners with non-tribal entities. So when you look at Arizona's water supply sort of portfolio, we rely on these surface water supplies, we rely on the Colorado River, we rely on groundwater, which is a non-renewable supply. As Chris mentioned, that's managed under state law. And the other Chris Mackey mentioned that she used the words having an assured supply is important for economic development. And the state has actually an assured water supply program that is aimed at ensuring that folks have water supplies available. And I'll leave some air for Doug to talk about that, because I think he probably can do a little better job on that than I can. But I will touch on just a little bit the importance of the Colorado River. DWR has a statistic that I've seen them use in their presentations that point to surface water supplies being 36% of the state's overall total water supply portfolio. And a large component of that is the Colorado River that's coming into central and southern Arizona. And so reductions to the Colorado River to Arizona are a key component of things that Arizona needs to work on and fight for. And as Chris mentioned, as we talk about the post-2026 guidelines, which I won't jump into now, that fight is such a strong word, but I think it's the right word, is at our door. And we'll be working on that with the other states in Mexico in the immediate coming years. Doug?
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so Chris did mention the assured water supply, and prior to me coming to EPCOR, I spent about 20 years with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and although the last 7 years or so of that was as their legislative liaison dealing with the state legislature, the vast majority of my career prior to that was dealing with the assured water supply programs, water rights, and all of those kinds of issues across the state. And as Patrick mentioned, within the active management areas, so that's the population centers, so that would be Prescott and Phoenix, the Pinal area, Tucson, and all the way down into the Santa Cruz area. There is a requirement from the state of Arizona that before any new subdivision go into place, that they can demonstrate that there's 100-year renewable water supply available to that subdivision before they can record a plat and before you can sell a lot. And so all of the existing subdivisions we have cities like City of Phoenix, private utilities like our Fountain Hill system, the Santan systems, Those are designated and they show the entire system has a 100-year renewable water supply. And then there's the requirement that if you're not being served by utilities like that, that each individual subdivision on its own shows that it has this 100-year assured supply. So the state has really positioned itself from supporting residential growth, that there's really a long-term guarantee of backup water supplies that are available to these subdivisions to ensure that when folks come in and invest their life savings in these homes, that there is a long-term water supply that's there to support them. So from a marketing standpoint, I think that's a great selling point, for everybody. It's trying to decide, where to move, if this is a good place to set up your tent. It really provides a robust background for us to be able to present our best foot forward. And even though some of the initial sources of those supplies for those subdivisions are groundwater, because of the requirements of the Assured Water Supply Program, the sister agency that is housed with CAP is the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. So if you're in a subdivision and you're using groundwater, because of the Assured Supply Program, you're required to put all that water back in the ground. And so the GRD for short does that. So we're not continually mining our groundwater. And so the growth basically since 1980 has been based on renewable water supplies under the Assured Water Supply Program. So that's a really long-term, robust, heavy-duty planning that the state has really put into place and really helps protect consumers out there. Now, as Patrick mentioned, we've got some challenges coming down the pike. We're going to have to start thinking about how we do this a little more creatively. Basically, as I have customers ask me all the time, hey, what's our water supply like right now? I have an existing house. Are we going to run out of water? And basically, no. It's been demonstrated there's over 100-year worth of supply there, renewable supplies. So.
And Allie, it's Chris. If you don't mind, I'd like to jump in with just a little piece here that I think is important. So you're talking about a region, the state of Arizona, that was built on collaboration and innovation. Imagine you got here and you're the pioneers and the only water running through the area was the Salt River, and you put, the Hohokams had been here 10,000 years earlier, and you set up shop here in downtown Phoenix and you're hauling your water, but you see the canals that the Hohokams built, and a guy named Jack Swilling sees them and figures he can build canals and creates a company called Salt River Project. And all of these things happen through innovation that led the valley to be able to be developed. But we didn't rest on our laurels. We have had an unbelievable, healthy respect for water. We were born in a desert. My mom used to walk behind me, and if I was leaving the water on while I was brushing my teeth, she'd smack me on the back of the head when I'm a kid so that I would turn off the water, for that large of a respect for water. But it goes bigger than that. It goes into the fact that the region, Phoenix itself, but the region is still using the same amount of water it used in 1957. So we've had exponential growth, but through innovation and creativity and through technological advances and conservation, we've kept our water where it's at. And you think about just Phoenix itself. In the last 20 years, we've grown by 400,000 people, but yet we've reduced our water use by 30% per capita in those 20 years. And so you look at and I don't mean to slight California, but as I said, we've had a water master plan in place since 1942. We've had our groundwater management plan in place since 1980. California put theirs in place like 7 years ago. And so we're very, very respectful of that water and using the water. We haven't even talked about reclamation yet and all the water that we reclaim and recycle and reuse and repurpose. And I kind of want to add on to that because we get a bad rap across the country these days with all of the New York Times and Washington Post articles that are written by reporters who just don't want to see growth in Phoenix anymore. They think we're all dying of heat. We're an unlivable environment. We have no water. We have no jobs. We have no educated workforce. And everything is quite the opposite. Everything is this thriving Mecca because we've all paid attention. We've all paid attention to that. And I'd like to note that there are cities, because of the changing climate environment across the globe, cities are coming to Arizona and asking how we've so thoughtfully planned for our water and how we've kept things in place all these years. So They may be blasting us nationally and internationally, but they're all coming to us and asking us how we do it.
Absolutely. And I think the number of folks that are moving to Arizona and Phoenix specifically, as well as businesses, tells a different story, right? And speaking of, Phoenix very recently had TSMC decide to locate in North Phoenix. So, Chris, can you talk about some of the water considerations and discussions that were going on and how that's going to impact the Phoenix community in terms of jobs, the economy overall, and water as well?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Phoenix has had a really strong focus on water, and our city council has had a really strong focus on our water master plan going back decades and decades and decades. And it was set up so that we could be this attraction location for these quality, high wage, knowledge economy jobs that industries happen to use water, whether you're in semiconductor, whether you're in emerging technologies, whether you're in aerospace and defense, all types of, whether you're in big data, all types of users use water. And Phoenix planned its water so that we had a water portfolio that could be used to attract those knowledge economy jobs and give them that assured water supply. One of those sectors that I was brought on board to help with was on the semiconductor side. I'd had an experience with it for my previous 17 years of my career in the East Valley. And I was brought on board to help really advance the advanced manufacturing side of Phoenix. And Mayor Gallego used to be an economic developer at Salt River Project. So she and I had recruited these type of companies before. And in working with the Arizona Commerce Authority and working with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, Phoenix spent quite a bit of time in 2019 in Taiwan and recruiting TSMC. And imagine you're an economic developer and you're trotting around Taiwan marketing a place called Biscuit Flats bordered by Dead Man's Wash. And that was, you kind of perpetuate that Wild West mentality. And what they were on the first trip out, it was they were interested. On the second trip out, we took everyone with us. We took our utilities, we took our universities, we took our planners, we took our workforce teams, and we did a deep dive with the TSMC team. And particularly, we took our water director because there were a lot of questions around water when you do semiconductor, when you do chip manufacturing. The water usage is significant. And so we're able to have those great conversations with them. And we made Phoenix comfortable. We made Taiwan comfortable, TSMC comfortable with the water use. I think what's really important to note with the amount of water these advanced manufacturing companies use is the amount of water that's reclaimed. So they reclaim on like Intel's fabs and TSMC's fabs, they currently reclaim about 90% of the water they use. So if they use 1 million gallons of water, they reclaim 900,000 gallons of water, and we get to use that water over and over and over again. TSMC in December, when they announced Fab number 2, announced that it will be the world's first 100% reclaimed fab. And so it will be the world's first green initiative fab. So while the water that they use for that day is more significant than a traditional user, they're reclaiming more than any other user. Their water usage, their per gallon of water usage per job is actually much lower than anyone else's.
Awesome. And the reason that Phoenix and Arizona as a whole is able to continue to grow sustainably is because there have been such strategic planning in place for decades. So, Chris Phelan, I'd like to pose this question to you. Drought in Arizona is clearly not an Arizona alone problem. The Southwest as a whole is experiencing this drought. And I'm curious to know, from where you are in DC, are there other states that are looking to follow the Arizona model? And are there discussions from some of your federal colleagues about how to address the drought in the Southwest region?
Yeah, no, it's a really it is probably my boss's, Senator Sinema's top priority. I'd say that, and immigration, which we're not here to talk about, luckily I don't handle. So the Colorado River is managed, it runs through 7 states, and the senator is part of a sort of informal Colorado River caucus with the 13 other senators of the states, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California, that represent the states through which the Colorado River run. Obviously, the drought conditions of the past 2 years got a lot of attention. The New York Times and Washington Post articles were mentioned. she has constant conversations with folks from those other states about how Arizona is a leader, what we do, both from the municipal, the tribal side. I think you have seen a lot of leadership and conservation from cities like Phoenix, from tribes in the immediate sort of metropolitan Phoenix area. I think California is obviously the largest user and they have the most senior rights on the Colorado River, but she is very keen to make sure the folks there understand just how much Arizona has done, both in the agricultural and the tribal and the municipal water use space to conserve, to be responsible stewards, to utilize, our Colorado River resources in a responsible and renewable way, like through groundwater replenishment. Sometimes that makes people a little upset at us, but I think it's a responsible way to be able to manage and account for water. And the city of Phoenix, Chris, I hope we'll have the chance to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that the city has for direct potable reuse. That's, I think, the right way to describe it. So basically water recycling is a really important potential new technology and investment. You hear a lot about desalination. She's exploring all of these options to make sure that, from the federal level where we can exert control and financing and, show Arizona as a leader and to bring the resources to bear for you and your customers and the folks who want to come live in Arizona. We're excited about that. We're always working on that. And we will continue, and she will continue to do that. Just to go back to your previous question, is there enough water? And I think there was one question in the chat about what can normal people do. I think it's important to remember that when you're talking about 100-year assured water supply, it's coming from multiple areas, which Patrick and Doug have talked about: groundwater, surface water. And if you see a shortfall, that shortfall is spread over 100 years. And so it's not like we're out of water right now. The program at the state level is designed to plan for 100 years so that you can then come to us or go to the state legislature and say, hey, we're projecting a shortfall in the Phoenix AMA. Okay, what resources can we then bring to bear to do more recycling, to do better conservation, to build education about normal citizens and businesses being a bit more, using less water, but in the same way that's still providing them the amenities and lifestyle that they're looking for in Phoenix. So you see, a 4% shortfall over 100 years. That's not today. And that's so that folks like me and Patrick and his boss, Brenda, and Doug and Mayor Gallego and my boss, Senator Sinema, can plan together to address that shortfall.
Thank you for clearing that up, because I think that's a common misconception. And I think the more people that we can educate about that, the less panic I think we will experience as a community. Speaking of planning, I think there is going to come a time when we are going to have to face a possible strain on our water supply. And I'd like to know from all four panelists, what is your organization's contingency plan in case we start to see a little bit more strain on water supply? Let's start with Central Arizona Project.
Of course, Hallie. So I have a couple of things to offer there. I would also maybe speak to I think one of the questions that was posed about, as an average citizen, what should I know about water in Arizona? And I think there's two things that folks should try and understand. You should try and know who their water provider is, and are they a city? Is it a well? Those kinds of things, because I think there are some simple things to know that help folks who own property to gain some comfort when they understand how the water is actually being supplied to them. And that's usually pretty easy stuff to find out. And then the second thing is goes along with what Chris was saying. these problems or challenges that we're facing in Arizona, and some of them quite publicly, are because in Arizona we do have a public discourse about water. I think Chris hit on the idea that there's an obvious question when you look at the environment in which Arizona and the people live about water and its connection to having life in the desert. And so because of that, Arizona has planned and been proactive, and they do tie politically and through a regulatory fashion and contractually, having an available water supply to people, to their homes and businesses, with some assurity that will be there. The challenge in that is sometimes we have public conversations about the challenges that we are, as opposed to it's not a conversation that we have. And so Arizona should be commended for that. It does create some difficulty some way, and I would reiterate what Chris said about we do have some challenges in Arizona, but they're not today. We're not talking about water to people's homes today. We have adequate supplies to cover those needs. It's in the future, and it's in our planning horizon, and there are things that we need to do. So, Allie, I'm going to answer your question. I think I'm going to try and answer your question and not take too much time away from the other panelists. Certainly, the things that we look at here at the Central Arizona Project, it is focused on trying to have water available for our contracts. We're not providing water directly to the public, but we do provide water to water providers. And so we work closely with the Arizona Department of Water Resources. We work close with our tribal communities. We work with our cities to try and find the best ways that we can help serve their interests through programs and funding and being reliable and advocating for Arizona. I think the most immediate thing that we would point to, and I would like to, I don't know if it's a shameless plug, it is a plug for the work that the senator has done on the Inflation Reduction Act and the $4 billion that Chris mentioned. Over the last 10 years, Central Arizona Project has worked with the other basin states to put water in Lake Mead through funded conservation agreements that have engaged both tribal, municipal, and agricultural customers. And frankly, the federal government has helped pick up the ball on that in a big way, particularly in the near term, and particularly with regard to the low water levels that we're seeing in Lake Mead right now. A significant amount of money has been set aside, and a significant amount of participation within Arizona to implement those conservation agreements is already in place for the next 3 years. And so I think that's not the only tool in our toolbox, but the near-term tool is we're getting folks who can tighten their belt. Perhaps it's an ag district who's not going to grow a summer crop, or a tribal community that has some flexibility about how it might use its water. We're implementing those in the short term. In the longer term, there are other things that we're working on, and I'm not going to enumerate them all here, but one of the biggest ones that we've been working on at the Central Arizona Project is the project was built to move Colorado River water into central and southern Arizona, and it only has Colorado River water in it currently. We've been working with the Bureau of Reclamation to authorize the importation of other water into the CAP system. So that might mean we could import groundwater or a desal project outside of Arizona, or some other partnership that is beyond our borders, and use the CAP project to move that water into Arizona. So making the infrastructure available and planning for that is something that we've been working on as some of our existing supplies begin to diminish. And I'll stop there.
I'd love to hear from you, Doug. What is your contingency plan for your organization? I know you have some experience with the Arizona Department of Water Resources as well. So I'm sure along the way you've picked up on some contingency plans for all sorts of agencies and stakeholders. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. That was a great overview, Patrick, of some of the larger scale options that we have. And just real quickly with as what Chris mentioned, that 4% of missing demand or unmet demand, have been talked about in the media, it's actually less than that. It's around 2% for municipal water providers. The rest of it is odd industrial users or agricultural users that really won't be here because we are going to be building on top of those fields, and that's part of this conversion of water use. So if you think about that, 2% over 100 years, that really won't start to manifest itself in maybe 80, 90 years. There's going to be a lot of attention put to that to head that off before it happens. So I think what's going to happen is, in the interim, there's a lot of bridge supplies that are out there that we can use as to help get us as some of these larger long-term projects start to come online. And it's going to require better cooperation amongst water providers. For example, we just completed a deal with the city of Phoenix where we're able to move some of our CAP allocation through this, be treated by city of Phoenix, and we can move that into our Paradise Valley system. And it helps offset some of the groundwater demands that we've had out there. And then that can be saved for later on if and when we get into heavier cap shortages. Another project that we are putting together is, I'm sure everybody's heard about all of the issues that folks up in the Rio Verde foothills are facing with being cut off by the city of Scottsdale. So in the interim, there's been a new district that's been formed, and we're able to exchange some of our effluent that we have stored in the West Valley. And then we're able to exchange that and be able to deliver for the next 3 years CAP water directly to Scottsdale, so we can start providing service to those customers in pretty short order. Longer term for them out there, we're waiting for final approval from the Corporation Commission, but we have existing long-term storage credits. So this is water that has been stored underground, actively stored, that is just waiting to be recovered. And so we have existing long-term storage credits that we're able to move through a series of trades. And then we're going to be able to provide that water directly to the Salt River Project. And then that will allow us to withdraw additional Verde River water. And then that'll be our long-term standpipe solution for those folks out there. So they won't be relying on any more groundwater pumping. It'll be a long-term stable supply for them. And this all happens through a series of exchanges between different entities. So we're able to move water around, and we're going to have to start creating thinking creatively to start moving the water around where we need it, multiple assistance for each other. And for example, I think as Chris mentioned, some of the drought mitigation funding that's available. We're working right now with an irrigation district in the Santan area where their supplies have been impacted by the shortages on the CAP, but we're seeking some additional federal funding. We're building a brand new state-of-the-art water reclamation facility there, but all the discharge from that will be sent to the irrigation district, and that will allow them to irrigate with this and not have to rely on the dwindling CAP or tap into additional groundwater sources. And so that'll provide a long-term stability supply for us to be able to reuse that water off into the future. So there's going to be a lot of those kinds of interconnect projects that'll help us get through this in the bridge while we look out in the future for these larger long-term projects to come online.
Thank you so much. Chris, I'd love to know how the city of Phoenix would handle a strain on water resources. Obviously for you, that is going to mean a different economic development and business attraction plan. It's also going to mean something different for the average homeowner or renter in the city of Phoenix. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
So when you look at what Phoenix has been doing on drought management, we've been doing drought management for 80 years. It isn't something new to us. We really didn't have to shift what we do. I mean, as an example, 7 years ago, before drought became the conversation, and there's a question in the chat that I'm going to address with part of what I'm going to answer here. So 7 years ago, the city council wisely invested $1 billion in a drought resiliency pipeline. Long before there was a drought declared on the Colorado, they're just forward thinking. They're always thinking about what can we be doing so that we don't get put in a bad position, so that we position Phoenix to stay where we can stay. And so that $1 billion drought resiliency pipeline that in time of drought could move water from the south to the north is nearly completed. I know it's been driving everybody crazy as it's under construction along the Dreamy Draw, and some of our parks have been closed while it's there. But when it's over, and should we face a drought, as you'll notice, but because of the wet winter we've been pulled out of the drought we were in and moved into a different level, now announced just a couple of weeks ago, and without the challenges that we were facing. But it's being forward thinking, it's being proactive. The city of Phoenix, and Chris mentioned he was hoping I would talk about it. The city is working on an advanced water reclamation program, and it's an advanced water reuse program. So it is being able to take virtually all of our water that we reclaim and put it back to drinking water standards. Nobody would even know where the water came from or where that it went to. And my words, not the water department. So Patrick and Doug, don't shudder when I say these words. It makes Cynthia Campbell lose her mind every time I say it. But it virtually creates a limitless supply of water, because every amount that's used that is brought back into the city, you're reclaiming and reusing over and over and over again to drinking water standards. And I think that ability to think ahead and to be proactive and not reactionary is why these other cities that are facing the exact same thing that we're facing are coming to us and saying, can we look at your water master plan? How did you put that in place? What did you think of? As an example, we're partnering, if you look back in a time when Bartlett Dam was under construction, it was a federal government project, and they ran out of money before they got the project finished. And so they came to Big Brother Phoenix and said, could we take out a loan? We'll pay you interest. Could we take out a loan so we can finish Bartlett Dam? And Phoenix very wisely said, we don't want the money back. We want the wet water that's held back by the additional dam capacity that we get by this investment. So I think all of us working together, whether it's Patrick and Senator Sinema's team, Doug with EPCOR, whether it's SRP, we're always forward thinking. We're not thinking about what are those things we're going to have to cut. We're thinking about how can we be creative and how can we just advance our water technology even more. As an example, we had a very wet winter. So you look at the Salt and the Verde system and the water that had to flow down the Salt River, because we didn't have enough dam capacity, enough reservoir capacity to hold it all. So they did a release, and some of our unbridged crossings were shut down for several months, and water was released. SRP, in a very proactive manner, came to all the cities and said, let's invest in a backup water reservoir so we don't have to do that release in the coming years. That way we can store even more water capacity from that side of the system, where the Colorado system would take, Patrick, I think the most recent thing I saw was it would take 7 winters as wet as the last one we had to get back to capacity in Meade and Powell. Is that right?
We are not short on storage capacity currently on the Colorado River system. I think that's a fair assumption.
So exactly to that point, but on the other side, on the Salt and Verde side, one good really solid storm and one good really solid storm winter, and it's completely filled back up again. It went from 60% back up to over capacity where they were dumping water out. So it's working together that same way that Arizona was founded, on innovation and collaboration to make these things work. 74% of our water is still used for agriculture. Not that that's a bad thing. We all need to eat, and we provide, you look at the water, the food that's provided across the country. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. But I think as we all work together, none of us are thinking about, oh my gosh, what are we going to have to cut? What we're thinking about is how can we work together to assure our citizens don't have to face that. And that's the forward thinking of Arizona compared to most other states. There's a question in the chat that I've been dying to work into my statement. And it said, since we've been growing the way we're growing, we've had the same water that we've had all this time, we've had a water master plan all of this time, how is it all of a sudden we're front and center in this water conversation and water concern across the country and across the globe, that Arizona Arizona, who is so thoughtfully planned, is now in the firing line of all of these conversations. And it's twofold. And I can link it to exactly one thing. So twofold is we've been experiencing just a little too much success in recruiting high wage knowledge economy jobs into Arizona. So some of our counterparts have to smack us down every once in a while by linking bad stories out about what's going on in Arizona. It's like when the power grid failed in Texas and some of our counterparts set flashlights to companies in Texas. And we don't do stuff like that in Arizona. We don't play that way, but others do. But the other thing is, and Doug put it so well, the Rio Verde. The Rio Verde conversation became this national story, and nobody realizes that Rio Verde is this small subdivision that sits out by itself that had a different water management plan than the rest of us had. And so all they hear is Rio Verde and Phoenix. And now Phoenix doesn't have any water. And so it was a mistold story. I can tell you that my team, so as I said, I've been doing this 30 years. I've been answering the water question for companies for 30 years. My own team had their parents, their brothers, their sisters, their friends from around the country calling them after the Rio Verde story and saying, are you selling your house in Arizona while it's still worth anything and getting out of Arizona? Because it was a mistold story. And they were able to educate them on why we're in a much better position than any other state is in its water.
Thank you. First, before I move on, Chris Phelan, is there anything you would like to add from a federal perspective?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this brief. It is difficult, as I think we all realize, to keep it brief, because for Senator Sinema, contingency planning is ultimately for the entire state. And I think there's a really important question here that Senator Sinema would latch onto. How can you simply explain this to your buyers? And we would say, how can we simply explain this to our constituents, who are you guys and your buyers? It's not always easy to explain it simply. I think, as realtors, when I just actually bought a house here in DC, and I can say it's a very complicated process that I didn't really understand well before. There is a certain level of like due diligence that folks have to, go through. I think Patrick put it really well, understanding who the water provider is. Is it EPCOR? Is it SRP? Just, like, who is your mortgage servicer, right? You need to know that, so you know who to go to with a question. I think that's something really easy that folks can then understand. Like, they can then draw a line, kind of, where is my water coming from? And it's going to be different for everyone. So that's just somewhere where people can start, and then they can learn more. The modeling and a lot of what comes out of the Department of Water Resources, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, it's great, but it is ultimately like hydrology. So it's confusing geology and sort of mathematical models of what's out there. I'm not going to try to say you should explain that to every buyer that you have, but maybe getting a briefing from some of the folks at DWR would be helpful to understand the groundwater supplies, how that interacts, their modeling with Colorado River supplies coming in and groundwater replenishment. I might recommend that as sort of a follow-up to this at the state level. For our specific contingency planning, there was the $4 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. We divided that into sort of two buckets. One, last summer, it was the sky is falling, Lake Mead is going to crash. We're not going to be able to release water down the Colorado River to actually reach the CAP. I mean, that was sort of the hyperbole that was out there. So the first bucket was for immediate conservation, basically to pay usually farmers to leave their water deliveries in the dam to preserve behind the dam to preserve that infrastructure and to make sure that there was water for the future. So like an immediate response to a crisis situation. We had the very wet winter, which again filled up the SRP system. I was flying home in April and I remember seeing the Salt River, gushing, flying in, which I hadn't seen. I don't know. I don't remember the last time I'd seen it that full, which was great. But then the second part of the IRA funding, and Doug, you touched on a little bit, is for longer term system conservation. It's really more efficiency and resiliency. So infrastructure projects that are going to make exactly what Doug was talking about, using effluent in place of Colorado River water, doing more recycling. We're supporting, actually, Doug, Senator Sinema put in a letter of support just for that project, a bunch of other ones. There's a lot of really creative stuff coming from the city of Phoenix, from the city of Tucson, from irrigation districts, from tribes, to be more efficient in how we use water, to creatively develop new resources, to share effluent, to recycle. One thing from the bipartisan infrastructure law also is actually looking to expand the storage capacity at Bartlett Dam. That's really important. If there was more storage capacity this year, Phoenix, would have more water to rely on, the metropolitan Phoenix area. One other project that SRP and CAP are working together on is actually being able to interconnect the two systems, exactly what Patrick was talking about, to be able to share water between the SRP and the CAP systems. And again, I'm trying to keep this simple. There's a lot of other opportunities like that to utilize groundwater and water that has been stored in Arizona to be able to get that to folks like who are your customers and buyers. There are some, technical hurdles, but these are the contingency planning things that Senator Sinema is thinking about. And thank God there was the really wet winter in the Rockies and northern Arizona last year. We're hoping for that, but to keep happening, I wouldn't anticipate 7 years in a row, but something, we're hoping that things continue to improve. But when you talk to your folks about to your buyers about this, it's just encouraging them to be responsible stewards, not saying you need to cut or we're running out of water, but you are moving to a desert and you're buying there. And so being a responsible steward is very important of those resources. And I think, as I've said, the city, all of our cities, tribes, agriculture districts have led the way nationally on that. And just, it's important that folks know that as they come here, but we are not running out of water in any sort of immediate sense. And I just gave a bunch of examples that are probably going to be hard to remember, but there's all sorts of stuff like that going on every day in all the cities, towns. Everyone is thinking about that here at the federal level. Trickles up, it trickles down. There's a lot of really good people working on this to make sure that folks can come and thrive in Arizona, businesses and residential and everything in between. So that's how we view it. That's a lot. Tried to keep it simple. Hopefully it was.
If only water policy were simple, right?
Well,
So I'd
job
like to
security
build-
for us.
Yeah, I guess so. I'd like to build off of something that Chris Mackey said a couple minutes ago in terms of mistold stories. So there's been a lot of fear about Saudis and alfalfa growing in the recent past. And I'd like to open up this question to the group, whoever has the most expertise in this area. What are the facts of that situation? And is there any appetite by either regional, state, or frankly, local or federal leaders that are willing to address the situation?
I'll jump on that, I guess. Basically, the way Arizona groundwater is set up is it's highly regulated in the active management areas. Again, I mentioned the population centers, so like Phoenix Metro. And then there's another layer of regulation. It's the irrigation non-expansion areas. There's 3 of those out there right now. There's a new one was just formed. And that limits, in certain groundwater basins, limits irrigation for agricultural uses. But the vast majority of the state of Arizona, groundwater is unregulated. And as long as you own the land, you use a licensed well driller, and you put that groundwater to beneficial use, not wasting it, you're free to use it however you see fit. And this particular farm the landowner is a company owned by Saudi Arabia is in one of those areas that's totally unregulated. I will say that that particular farm has been there since the late 40s, early 50s. So this is not a new thing, that it's just a new landowner. that's been there for, I don't know, 10 years or so now. The water use on that farm, we did some looking at the actual irrigation practices when I was still at the department many years ago. It actually that they've improved the efficiency. So on a per acre basis, they're using less water than it used to be there. So, I mean, from one perspective, yeah, there's somebody that's out there that's a foreign owned business, and you can paint that as negative as you want. They're farming and they're exporting that crop out to their use in Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, it could still be a locally owned or some conglomerate from New York that would own the land. And the alfalfa that's being raised that's a global commodity. Arizona is known for growing some of the best alfalfa on the planet. It's highly prized. It gets a lot of high dollar value to it, and that gets shipped all over the globe. Whether it's the farmer directly to it or through a broker, it doesn't always stay here in the state. So just like a wafer fab plant, those commodities are made and shipped all over the planet for uses everywhere. So on one hand, yeah, it kind of galls you that it seems to be a foreign owned company exporting our water, or it's just another business that's doing business. They employ local people, they buy fuel locally, pay local taxes. It's just the ownership of it galls certain people. So it's perfectly legal. And if there are discussions on limiting at the legislature who can own land, who can farm with it, I mean, that's all sorts of policy issues that's beyond me as a water geek. So I'll let that go. I did see a question in the chat, and I think we danced around it, but I'm not really answering it directly, regarding the groundwater moratorium that the Department of Water Resources issued earlier this summer. I'll touch on that real quick, and then I'll sit back and be quiet. What the department did is, with their groundwater modeling, is they showed in that 100-year projection that any new assured water supply applications that would be based on groundwater, that there was insufficient groundwater in certain locations to allow them to continue to issue new certificates of assured water supply, analyses of assured water supply. All of the projects that had been approved up to that point still have 100-year groundwater availability. That's still there. And those projects can continue to move forward. They just aren't going to issue any new certificates based 100% on groundwater. The modeling, what it did show is there were not any, the news media has tried to paint this as we're out of water, we're out of groundwater, things are going dry. The modeling does not show that. The modeling shows that in certain remote locations, there are areas that exceed the regulatory depth, but there shows that there's water below that depth limit, and that the vast majority of the Phoenix Valley still has lots of groundwater available above that depth limit. And so basically, this is the program doing what it's supposed to do, is to make sure that these remote areas, that if you're in one of those, you're going to have trouble demonstrating the assured supply on groundwater. But there's ways that they can work through this. And in fact, I'm part of the Governor Hobbs's commission to look at this and see how we can move water around, how we can readdress some of the assumptions that go into the modeling. And I fully expect the governor's mandate has been that we come up with solutions by the end of the year. And I fully expect we'll be able to do that. Again, the vast majority of the valley does not have an issue. It's a few isolated pockets, and the ability to interconnect some of these systems and move water around. Again, it's only 2% of the municipal demand that they show having issues. So hopefully that kind of answers what's impacted, what's not. The existing certificates, existing subdivisions are fine. The existing designations are fine.
Thank you so much. It looks like we're coming up on time, but before we go, I'd like to ask the panel, I'd like to throw it out there. What is one myth that you'd like to dispel about water before we get off the webinar today?
For Phoenix, I would say that it's the fact that we don't have any.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else have a myth that they'd like to dispel before we leave here today?
I don't know if it's so much a myth, but it's certainly an idea that I like to convey, and that we can do things. Arizona has worked hard historically. We've had challenges, we have challenges, but we can do things to continue to support the economic viability of the state. The people on the panel with me today do that, maybe some of those participating with it as well. And so while there are water challenges, and I'm not afraid to say that we are seeing climate impacts in the Colorado River Basin, and those are going to require adaptation. And I have a high level of confidence that people will rise to those challenges and find solutions so that we can continue to thrive here in Arizona.
Yeah, I would second both of those. I mean, the Central Arizona Project itself was once viewed as totally infeasible, and Carl Hayden ultimately, made it happen. There were deals made at the congressional level, and it was constructed over a long period of time, but it was at a certain point, viewed as a sort of pie in the sky idea of a canal running through the 500 miles from the Colorado to Tucson. That was viewed as crazy to people. We're facing challenges, but we're not out of water, and it's not, we have the ability, the expertise to address them, and we have the time, the knowledge, and the resources to do it. So there are challenges, but it is not end all be all. Phoenix is not out of water. There are a lot of good people working on it, and there are a lot of options that might take that might be big lifts like the Central Arizona Project was, but we have good partners. There's a lot of people focused on this. It's very important, and there is the water supply for your customers and for Arizona to continue to grow and thrive. And we're going to continue to fight to make sure that's the case.
And I would just follow on with that permutation of that. Yeah, we're not out of water. The biggest myth to me is, we just sit on our hands and don't do anything. And, we've been showed for over 100 years, we do these proactive programs to plan for, deal with the fact we live in a desert, and everything from the beginning of SRP through CAP, through the enactment of the groundwater code. We store water underground. We recycle almost every single drop of reclaimed water that we have out there. And we do all these proactive things. And we're going to shift and continue to do this moving into the future. We just don't bury our heads in the ground.
Absolutely. I'm hearing a very hopeful message, and it's because of our intelligent, awesome experts like you guys that are planning out our water future and making sure that we have a sustainable future for all of us. I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our attendees. Keep doing the wonderful work that you're doing. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.